Hey everyone, this is Darren at GitLab, and today I'm joined by Rodolphe at Remotive, and we're going to talk about remote work processes and culture. Specifically, how do you get and start and thrive in your first remote role? And what does culture look like in a remote company? And what is the community like in a remote company? And what is the greater remote community growing and thriving? What are they doing? So, Rodolphe, I'll throw it over to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Darren. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited to chat about remote today. I've been lucky to be in this space for probably about 7 or 8 years now. Started to work at Buffer as director of operation finance, helping grow the team, and I've been focusing on Remotive. We are a platform that helps tech professionals land remote jobs, and one of the things we do is to chat with remote teams to learn more about them and to see what best practices are to get very happy remote workers and folks who do amazing from wherever, really.
Amazing. That's incredible. Do you want to jump right into favorite things about remote work, or do you want to start with how do you land and thrive at your first job?
I'd love to start with favorite things, maybe about remote work. And we were just chatting before this started recording about family proximity. I think that that's a great one. Working remotely, you don't have to work within driving distance from headquarters. You can work from wherever you're the happiest. And that makes such a difference because I've seen so many people getting to travel anywhere because that's what they like best. And others just get to settle down and enjoy being close to friends and family. And I'm connecting from Paris, France today, and I still get to work with amazing companies from wherever. And that would have been hardly possible maybe 10 years back, but today it's great. So that's something I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, I've found that one of the things about remote work that's so compelling for people that really value their tribe, their village, their family, is being able to live and work where they're most fulfilled and where they're most comfortable. And that's huge, especially if family is a top priority for you. Having to relocate to a place where your family is not is a soul crusher for a lot of people. And so giving that back can mean everything for remote workers. And even from the employer perspective, you get a lot of loyalty that comes with that because people that appreciate that really understand that they should be grateful for it and just how rare it is. I hope it becomes less rare over time, but for now, it's still pretty rare and pretty special. And you just get workers that are happier to be working because they can look around at any moment and realize that even on a bad day, they're where they want to be, whether that's home, a favorite co-working space, on the side of a mountain, wherever um, they happen to be that day. It's it's important. And I've said, you'll evaluate things when you're considering any new job. You'll evaluate things like salary. You'll
Hmm.
evaluate things like your coworkers, culture. All of these things play into it. But in a remote environment, if you prioritize the autonomy and flexibility to live anywhere you want to, maybe even above salary, you're in the right place. And people that value that very highly really tend to thrive in remote environments.
And that's true. And you get to see it from the bigger picture, which is exactly that, setting the right criteria and down to the small things. Today I could tend my garden because I could take a break between two calls. Today I could set my own temperature because you just decide how it's going to be in your room, or spend quality time with your pets, or just do anything you want, really. That means, sure, you may want to go to a co-working space or coffee shops, but that's your choice, really, and none of anyone else's. And affording the flexibility, I think, makes it different in so many people's life.
Yeah, and I'll say what feels cool about this conversation is I speak to a lot of people that are joining GitLab and other remote first and all remote companies for the first time. So they're coming from a career of working in co-located spaces where they've commuted all their life, they've gone into offices all their life. So all of a sudden they're in this remote role and they're faced with this all new world. And while it's amazing, it's also sort of daunting of how do I optimize this? What should I be taking advantage of? I am not trained for this. I'm just used to the typical wake up, do the commute, go in the office, kind of leave yourself at the door, bring your business side into the office, and then rinse and repeat day after day. So hearing what other people enjoy about remote work opens the eyes of people that are new to remote work on what exactly is possible and how to optimize their life if remote is now a part of it. So I
Yeah.
know for me personally, health is a huge element of this. I think about people that spend 1 or 2 hours commuting each way every single day. It leaves a lot less time for life outside of work. And so by zooming out, you really get you it for me, it gives me this much needed perspective that life is more than work, because when your day to day is consumed by commuting and time spent in the office, it's actually really difficult to zoom out and realize that there's anything else happening around you other than that, because
Yeah.
that's where you're spending so much of your time. So just having more perspective, and that just for me, that helps from a mental health standpoint of just not being so wrapped up in the vacuum. It's very easy, to your point, to take a break between two calls and go do something meaningful to you in your home or in your community. It just changes the whole perspective on the day. And for day after day after day, extrapolated over an entire company, this completely changes the fabric of how people treat each other, morale, personality. And then that all just relates back to quality of work, because happier employees are more likely to produce better work.
That's true. And that goes to trust oftentimes, which means one of the things I love about GitLab is how explicit you are about your handbook, for instance. I remember my first role back in past remote world, like 2013, 2014. One of the thought I had looming in my head was, am I doing enough? And it just kept going to my mind again and again and again. I'll be working from Europe, mostly with folks based in the US. And by the time I would sort of stop working about 7 p.m., they'll still be like going on full steam, which is okay. You get to work with your time zone, right? But do you know when you've done enough is a huge question. And when your organization starts organizing trust through a handbook, through communications, I think that's where the difference lies. And you're not at home with an outsourced task. You're part of a team that has a culture and you can debate what's been happening. So that I appreciate a lot.
Yeah, I've transparency is a core value at GitLab, and I feel like it needs to be a core value at honestly at any company, but especially at a remote first or an all remote company, because you don't have eyes on anyone. Now, studies have shown just being able to see someone doesn't mean that they're actually doing anything productive or that they're even happy wherever they are. But it gives you this false sense of security that because
Mm,
I can see someone, I trust that they're okay, or I trust that they're on task, or whatever it may be. But setting up a fabric of trust across the company is huge. It just, you operate under this assumption that positive intent on all things. Everyone is a manager of one. They're working on whatever is most important for them. And if they need help, they know where to look. The beauty about all remote is everyone is just a click away. If you need help, you can access the entire company across the entire world. If you're
yeah.
using Slack or whatever your communication tool is, you don't have to think, oh, what floor is this person on, or what office is this person on? And because we operate asynchronously, you're welcome to reach out to anyone, and then they can just respond back to you at a time when it's convenient to them. That has helped me so much operating asynchronously. To your point on, am I doing enough? You structure your day, you lay out your tasks, you work with your manager, and when you've done those things for the day, you're free to disconnect and leave, because in an asynchronous fashion, it's not like you're leaving someone hanging.
Yeah.
Everyone works on a slightly different schedule. And by releasing yourself from the burden of, I have to be in sync with this global company, which isn't even possible to begin with, you're freer to work on things without that constant time burden that just like weighs on the shoulders of people that have to go into an office and operate between two set times.
That's flexibility right there, which is brilliant. And transparency as well, because even I, as an external person, can follow what's happening in the company. I find that, you have very open, heart to heart debate, including what's been happening with your CEO jumping in and seeing, how do people feel about things. I feel like there's an ongoing conversation and everyone is allowed to their opinion, even commit and disagree is an option. But you get to see what's happening from the inside as an employee, but also as a stakeholders and thinking about applying to the company or being a partner or a client, you get to see how it gets made. And I think that's very rare. And the age of transparency is facilitating remote work. So that's a plus as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're reaching a tipping point where people are going to start demanding more transparency and flexibility altogether. We're living in a world now where the internet is ubiquitous enough that companies that have purely digital outputs, there's very little reason for why they should even have an office. It's very inefficient. It creates additional burden on infrastructure when there's really no need for it. And in some ways, the demand for the flexibility and autonomy to live and work where you're most fulfilled kind of goes hand in hand with the demands of we should treat each other well within the company. We
Yeah,
should expect open, honest, transparent conversations. And because there's no physical hallways or elevator chats, everyone should have access to the most amount of information to whatever degree the law allows. And there's a lot of freedom that comes in that. And honestly, with great power comes great responsibility. And I feel
true.
like people that are entrusted with that recognize it. You sort of feel the weight of, okay, I'm being entrusted with all of this information, and we're making as much of it as we can public. So we have this greater responsibility to be good stewards of that information, be good stewards of the process, because whether you want to or not, you're setting an example. You are the role model when you're that open and transparent. But the world needs more of that. More companies need
That's
to
true.
do that. Operating behind closed doors, shrouding yourselves in mystery has proven to not be a great solution for anyone.
And that's a great playbook. That's a great page from the open source playbook whereby you can share as you go along. And, some awesome companies have started doing it, but it's great to see that you've been able to lead the way at scale. Because certainly I started to build a list of remote startups back in 2016. I had 200 names back there. Following year, 600. Year after, 900. And now we had 2,700 remote startup. Was startup that hire remotely. And it feels like it's truly taking off. And the question that's getting asked most often is, how do we do it well? We don't want to be just in remote to be in an outsourcing business. We want to create a company culture where people feel connected, still see some of each other, flying at times, are happy to continue doing their thing. So we need more role models. Basecamp has been awesome. Envision has been doing great things. Buffer, Doist, and GitLab are certainly some of the companies people turn to see what's what.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words, and I agree. The more role models we can have, the more likely this is going to continue. And so part of what my role is at GitLab is to build guides on how we do certain things. How does GitLab think about meetings? How does GitLab think about documentation? How does GitLab think about asynchronous? How do we handle one-on-ones? How do we handle informal communication? All of these elements, there are playbooks and answers for how to do this co-located, but we're kind of paving the path for remote. And there's subtle differences between when you're starting something 5, 10, 50 employees and when you scale up to 1,000 or
Right.
beyond. I was actually having a coffee chat with a colleague the other day, and he says one statement he likes to use is, if you're looking at GitLab as a model, but you're starting a new remote company right now, look at what we did, not necessarily what we're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you scale up to that size, then you can look at what we did, because hopefully we will have continued scaling, and kind of look at the roadmap as it applies to you. Because obviously we've changed things and changed processes and constantly iterated as we've grown. And so hopefully that by being open about that and documenting all of that, companies are able to sort of rewind the clock a little bit and
Yeah.
see what was happening at a certain stage.
It's great. And it's great to see you hop into that role, because I feel like it's shuffling the cards yet again. I feel like we had an era where in tech you had to be a team lead to go forward. Then folks realize individual contributors can do just as well as managers. So you have those dual track. And now you add a layer of complexity, which is beautiful, which is, how do we operate as a top, ambitious, fast growing company, but remotely? And if you're not intentional about this, well, you won't be prepared for what's happening, because as you said, there are not so many startups that operate at that scale. So it's been interesting, and so many mid to large companies I've had chats with, I've said, well, we have a chief people officer, we have folks working in operation, and I've been curious about your creator role, because it sort of sits, I feel, in the intersection of a few things. And beyond keeping the pulse, I feel like it's great to recheck out externally and keeping an eye of how it's all growing remotely.
Yeah, the role that I'm in is it's an interesting one. It crosses over almost every layer of the company because as an all remote company, we're at over 1,000 people now. So much of everything that happens in the company is either nuanced or slightly different because
Mm,
we operate remotely. And it also gives us a chance to do things differently and better and more efficiently because we're remote if we're intentional about it and we
yeah,
think about it. So my role is really at the intersection of optimizing tooling processes, ensuring that the values are lived, transparency, collaboration, efficiency, figuring out a way to showcase that in a remote team so that people understand and recognize the kudos that are happening and how people are living those values. It's working with onboarding so that when people come in and they've never worked in a remote space before, it's their first time ever, that they feel comfortable with it and they know how to optimize their life, and they're paired with onboarding buddies that have kind of been there before and can give them tips on how to arrange their workspace and arrange their day and think about living an off-peak lifestyle and shifting their schedules around, things that they've never been able to do before, helping them understand how to do it, and
yeah.
even opening their eyes to what's possible. And then communication overall, working with media and having calls like this on evangelizing what we're doing in the hopes that we can encourage and influence even more remote companies. So it's a lot of things. And when this job was presented to me, I thought, this honestly, this job description might be one of one right now, but
Yeah.
I don't think it will stay that way for long. I feel like as more remote startups grow, and even as some of the mid to large size businesses decide like maybe we should close the office, like maybe we should pivot to remote, you're going to need someone that kind of looks at all of the stakeholders in the company and sees where
Yeah.
there are opportunities to create new efficiencies and really engage with employees um, now that remote is a part of the fabric of the company.
I love that. I feel like that it's good to be intentional, and it's interesting to see how it trickles down in almost every aspect of companies. I feel like I first heard of it in 2013 when the Trello team, before they got acquired by Atlassian, um, they had this, I think they had that habit saying, if you're taking conference call in the office as a hybrid team, every single person should be behind one single computer. So you should not have that conference room feeling whereby you have one camera filming 10 people and then use it by yourself, zooming from the comfort of your home. And it's subtle differences. You talked about onboarding, you talked about communication. That does make a difference when they add up, because they do. And the best gift you can give a remote employee is to make sure that there are no second class citizens. I do feel like that's something that's up and coming, and I haven't seen much of it. Feels like COO, CEOs have been, on HR have been carrying part of it, but I feel like being intentional, especially for larger company transitioning or scaling through it, feels like a critical challenge.
Yeah, it's hitting at a great time where it intersects a lot with the drive to be more inclusive as a company. And so there's a drive to really, for hybrid companies in particular, to make sure that remote employees aren't seen as second class citizens. And for those viewing in the YouTube description, I will link these, but I've actually built a guide on what a hybrid company is and some of the downsides and some of the benefits. It's certainly better than forcing you to be co-located. And then some of the questions to ask when you're applying for a remote role within a part remote or hybrid remote company. And one of them is, how are calls conducted? If the people are in the office, is everyone asked to open up their own laptop or computer and engage as if the remote employee is, or are those people allowed to
Yeah.
congregate in a room with a camera that you can't really see or hear anybody very well? It says a lot about what they think of you and what they think of the people that are outside of the office. Because people are humans, and we have this natural tendency to think more highly of someone we see physically day to day. So if you're in a situation where part of the company is co-located, you want to make sure to do everything you can to be very intentional about not penalizing those who aren't in the office.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to overlook them. I mean, out of sight, out of mind, and that cannot happen if you want to build a culture that works really well And that's why remote first and all remote where there's no office is the easiest way to accomplish this, because it just removes the temptation of favoring or putting anything um, in HQ that wouldn't be available to remote. But I understand that that's not always feasible. There are some companies that started as co-located before the internet was as proliferated as it is now,
Hmm.
and they're considering how do we expand our teams without making them move to really expensive job centers, and they're considering adding remote. That's going to take some additional thought on how do you do that well, how do you do that thoughtfully, but it's a great problem to have. I love that companies are considering it.
It's going to be a big shift, and I feel like the numbers are talking already. Like we feel like so many more people are interested in this. Um, Silicon Valley is partially coming around as well, saying that it's great tourism in San Francisco Bay Area, but it's better to spend it elsewhere because your money is going to go longer as well, should you
Yeah.
decide to be located differently as well.
Yeah, we've actually we've been working on some panels and remote events with a venture capital firm that wants to be associated with this because they want to invest in seed rounds with remote first and all remote companies because they see what's happening. These seed rounds are being completely consumed by an office lease and real estate, and having to pay extravagant salaries just to get someone to be able to exist in some of these places. And you just zoom out a little bit and you think that's a really poor use of funds. Like we should be investing in people or tools or R&D or anything other than a
Mm-hmm.
building, if at all possible.
True. Okay, next, I think we could be talking about how you find and start your remote job as well. I felt like that's something we wanted to touch on as well.
Yeah,
Um,
that'd be awesome. Your website actually helps people connect to community and connect to roles where people are they want to jump into remote. This is a good place for them to start. People often ask me, how do you find and start your first remote role? And in the past, I've shared it may be best to get a co-located job where remote isn't a part of the fabric of that job, and then kind of work your way into a remote role. So in the past, before all remote and remote first was really a thing, one of the best methods was just getting an office job, hopefully somewhere you want to be anyway, build a rapport with your team,
yep.
prove that you can work outside of the office, maybe experiment with traveling a bit here and there, 1 or 2 weeks, and still getting your job done, and sort of prove the model for yourself, and then introduce it kind of slowly, like have a talk with your manager, maybe work from home 2 or 3 days a week, and then maybe transition that to like 4 weeks, and then 1 week on, 1 week off, whatever works for them. You kind of got to read the temperature of the company if it's not in the DNA of the company. That is one way to do it. But I'm curious if you're seeing now with all remote and remote first companies being more ubiquitous, do people have a better shot at just finding remote roles that are remote from the beginning, A, and B, are they finding satisfaction in jumping into those if they've never worked remotely before? Are these companies giving them the tools and the methodologies and the mentors to acclimate to it if they've never done it before?
That's a great one. I feel like it's becoming more common, or at least becoming more frequent that companies, remote first companies, will offer those positions, and they're great. They also gather a lot of interest because talent from all around the world can apply. So oftentimes people we work with have 1,000+ applicants to a single position. So that's a staggering number. And as awesome as those positions are, it becomes interesting and tricky to differentiate yourself as an applicant because folks need to be demonstrating that they have past experiences, maturity when it comes to remote work, maybe more importantly than experience. So you can have a junior person who is very mature when it comes to working remotely because they've done a variety of projects, worked on open source, they understand how it works to be distributed. And other people that maybe are more senior, but they very much enjoy the office environment. So there's no like perfect applicant, I'll say, but many of those companies that do have remote first position open I feel like they're becoming extremely intentional about onboarding. They're becoming very intentional about how do we set yourself up for success. So some companies will fly you into the nearest team member so you can have that softer feel for what the company stands for in your first 3 months. Other will have swag delivered to your door because then it's sort of become a culture thing as well. Other will say, well, we help with learning and development. Other will say we can fly you to conferences and sort of have mini retreats for 2 to 5 people to get together and congregate. So even teams with smaller budget are becoming very intentional and saying, well, we're looking for the person that's going to be with us for the next 2 to 5 years, say, and we're happy to wait an extra 3 months to go through awesome candidates we gather in order to get the right person to join us. So sorting through awesome candidate is a big job and it's a tough task, but certainly it's been very rewarding when you welcome the person that feels great in your company.
Yeah, that's enlightening. And I'll say I've heard some advice on if you're searching for a job, it can become tempting to just take any job, especially if the job search drags on. I think in particular, if you're really, really called to a remote role and you really know that's where you're going to thrive, it's worth exploring. It's worth the patience. It's worth the longer road because to your point, they are more rare. So when you're getting 1,000 applications for each role, the numbers say the likelihood of you getting through are slim. But it's not worth pursuing if it's something that you're really passionate about. Um, and I do think there's something to be said about applying for roles where remote isn't explicit, it's not listed. But if there's a track record at that company of certain employees being able to work remotely, or they're experimenting with remote, or they've
True.
been on a hiring spree
Mm-hmm.
remotely, you can look at those signals and think, I can put myself forward as a candidate that can do this job well
That's true.
and prove that it can be done from anywhere. And I actually wrote about this on the hybrid remote page, which is it's kind of a downside that in that entire interview process, you're going to have to lobby for yourself essentially
Mm-hmm.
on why they should trust you to do it remotely. Because
Yeah,
a hiring team that is set on having someone co-located will always think, well, I could just get someone local. Why would I employ this person that's remote? And so to some degree, you have to have the art of persuasion and a case on yourself on why you can do this from anywhere. We're kind of in this awkward teenager phase where that's
mm-hmm.
still a thing.
Yeah,
But I'm just, for any job seekers watching, I would say be prepared for that. It's not like you're necessarily entitled to remote if the company isn't set up for it and the
that's right.
infrastructure isn't built yet. And so it might be more challenging for you to do it, but I still think it's worth it. And that's, of course, if you cannot find a role in a remote first or all remote company where that is already laid out. That's kind of the ideal situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think remote is worth fighting for, even on roles that it's not explicitly laid out for. Because then once you're in there and you do an amazing job, you become the pioneer within that company.
That's right.
And so you become this beacon for change where other people realize what's possible. We mostly find that people don't love commuting to the office. There are a few people that really, really, really love going into the office, but for the most
Yeah,
part, they do it because they just don't want to miss out, or that's the way it's always been done. And if you come in there and you're a beacon of change, you can help change that culture. And it might take some time, but that would be a cool thing to be a part of. We actually have some
that's
people
true.
at GitLab that loved going into the office and actually joined GitLab not because we were all remote, but actually in spite of it. They just wanted to work on the product and with the team. And they thought, I'm going to miss the office, but I'm going to give this a shot. And it usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks before they've pretty much been fully converted, and they think, I don't know how I could ever go back into an office again. So you can help drive some of that change. It's just going to be tougher, but it's a
Yeah,
battle worth fighting, I think.
that's true. And for anyone who's trying to convince their current employer to go remote, I felt like you really need to think about your strategy, which is doable, but you need a champion. You need to have your boss and arguably your boss's boss who are on board with you doing a trial, which is one of the magic words. You never set up something permanent. You're just trying it for a duration of time. And then let the record show that you've been doing amazing, which helps to build your case. But Trust, result, and management support are key, and you'll need all three to go through the process. Trust from your manager that they they know you enough or they trust you enough to let you work without direct control, without like a seat in the bad policy. You need to be delivering and over delivering so that they don't worry about performance, and you need management approval saying that we're okaying that person trying it out, and it may or may not pan out for us. But if you got that approach saying just a trial, give me 3 months, I'll come in every second day, wanna like every second week, or I'll start working from on Fridays, then you may be setting something up for yourself.
Yeah, and the champion element of that is really important because it's important to position yourself amongst the company as being a champion for this, and that you aren't you aren't looking out for just yourself, but in fact you're hoping to pave the way for every other employee that has to commute into the office but really longs to work remotely. And you want to help enable this for the team, not to just be the one person that doesn't have to commute. That's a key difference there. And you touched on actually having some face-to-face contact and having some
Mm-hmm.
in-person interaction. And I'd like to go off on that tangent just a bit. I think that's so important. Even in GitLab, we get the entire company together every 9 to 12 months for GitLab
Yeah.
Contribute. And we get everyone together for a week. It's not death by PowerPoint. There's an opening and closing keynote, but everything in between is just excursions and people having opportunities to bond as humans. Humans
Mm-hmm.
first, colleagues second. And it's so vital. Those in-person interactions really help sustain us and sort of until we meet again. And especially in a remote company, the in-person elements, they just take on so much more value. You don't take them for granted. Whenever there's a work opportunity to be together at a conference or an event or a micro retreat, whatever it may
Yeah.
be, I found that remote employees really look forward to those. They don't see them as a burden that's taking them away from home. They understand how rare they are and how much they get out of them. I think they get outsized impact and benefit
Mm-hmm.
from more limited face-to-face contact because it's more rare, and they just go into it saying, all right, I'm going to soak in the moment. I'm going to be present in the moment because this face-to-face interaction may have to sustain us on Slack for the next 6 months or however long it may be.
That's for sure. There's something very special about seeing a project team or colleagues meeting in person for the first time. It's like being a fly on the wall, and you see sort of interaction where the first person going to say, "Ooh, you look taller than as you would be," and the second's like, "You have elbows. I never see those on Zoom." Like, that's amazing. And it's almost like remote work is what happens during the two times where you physically meet. It's a not necessarily a break, but just a different way to interact, and that's going to be maintaining social interaction. And humans are bonding mammals, so they want to interact, they want to keep in touch. And getting to be at that conference, getting to visit that colleague or be at a grand meetup, it's certainly going to sustain your motivation, certainly going to be great as well. And so many companies are becoming very thoughtful about this as well, because everyone's is in a different setup. Some folks have very little commitment and can just hop on a plane and fly over. Others are going to say, I have 3 kids at home. So the company needs to be mindful and say, how we're going to be supporting the primary caregiver leaving the household for a duration of times. So I've been seeing more and more thoughtful work being done around. Of course, we want folks to see each other. Of course, it's great for the company and for employees to connect, but how much flexibility, which is the essence of remote work, are we allowing or giving away when we get people to be congregating in a certain place? So when thoughtful, I think it's awesome to meet in person and gets to spark so much joy among groups.
Yep, agreed completely. And I think each company and each individual needs to consider how much of that they want or desire. To your point with GitLab Contribute, not everyone can come. Some people don't want to travel, or they have challenges with mobility and they can't, and that's
Yep.
fine. Like, no one is penalized for not coming, but it's great for a company to have that as one option for
Yeah,
bonding
absolutely.
informally. And it's just one option. There are plenty of other ways to do it, but at least remote gives you the ability to do things like that. And I think people rally around it and they celebrate it. So let's talk a bit about the remote work community. One thing that I've noticed in joining GitLab is that there's a really passionate community of people that are working remotely. And it doesn't matter if they work for competing companies or whatever it is, they really rally around the fact that hey, we're all in this remote thing together, and it's still a minority at this point. So we have to kind of bond together and create unity around championing the cause. And I just think that's really powerful. I'm interested to get your perspective on how you've seen the community grow
Yeah.
through your own company, and how you think that's going to change and continue to evolve in the next year or two.
So it's been changing. The changes have been amazing. If you think about the data, if you think about Stack Overflow survey, for instance, who's been surveying developers every single year since, I believe, 2007. Um, Working remotely and flexible work go hand in hand and have been slowly but surely upping the ranks, to a point where it's become more important to some people than vacation time. It's been even more important than salary to some extent, because sometime you may make money that you can't spend, or be in a setup where it's just very different. So the second thing that's been interesting is that we're starting to see second generation remote workers, I call them, meaning that some folks started remote jobs, say in the 2010 era, and then now moved on to the second remote first company. So you've got a wealth knowledge that is starting to circulate a little bit, and the number of company operated at the time were pretty small, but it's now not uncommon to see someone who was at Automatic go to Envision or GitLab. And the fluidity in the market is becoming very interesting because you've got more exchanges. Crypto has also been powering the community to some extent, with a lot of projects stemming out of Europe, but hiring and growing from anywhere, just like Wikipedia and other open source projects have. So all those factors are bringing to what you shared earlier, which is teenage years. We're not in infancy anymore. We're stumbling around a little bit more and trying to find ourselves, but there's a lot more interest, and you can see that according to report I've been seeing, including the Buffer report, folks who work remotely will hardly ever go back to a desk job, which is a bit of a tectonic change because they may not go back. And the second thing is, you may not be fully remote, but very few people are going to turn down the ability to be flexible on a Friday. So it feels like technology, talents, and overall life enjoyment is shifting towards more flexibility, and there's no changing that. I couldn't be more excited to see every single week, every single month, companies popping up in Hacker News, Y Combinator, and saying, well, we raised some money. Now we hire from anywhere because talented folks are not linked to the zip code. So I feel very hopeful and super excited to see more companies and candidates alike embracing remote.
That is well said. One thing we like to say at GitLab is that hiring globally is a significant competitive advantage right now, but we're going to judge our success and our legacy on how quickly that competitive advantage will diminish. Because that would mean there are more remote first and all remote companies to choose from. To your point, there's some fluidity in the market. And we believe that the overall economic lift from having a proliferation of those types of companies will inevitably end up benefiting the industry as a whole. So it's not something that we should hope remains a competitive advantage. We should hope that the world changes so significantly that everyone becomes better off, and just the economic tide will rise all the way around when people aren't spending so much effort and time and money on commuting or real estate that they don't really need, or office buildings that could serve as affordable housing. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I do agree with you that we're reaching a tipping point where people are picking their heads up from their phones a minute and saying, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing with our lives? Is this really the best way to spend the hours in the day that we're given? People are starting to understand, like, life is a vapor. It's shorter than you might think, and remote enables you to enjoy more of that while also contributing productively to a company that enables that. So it creates this positive cycle versus this cycle of animosity where you don't really want to get up and go serve this company because you have to go commute all this time, and then you come home and you're still frustrated, and you wake up the next day and you're still frustrated. That's flipping that on its head can only be better for business and for society as a whole. I think extrapolated, if you have happier people, happier founders, happier investors, people that are just more joyful about what they're doing and they can infuse life into work instead of work derailing their life all the time. It's hard to put numbers on it, but I just got a feeling that that's going to help things out overall.
It does feel like it's changing a lot. And you can see Lambda School, for instance, having local chapters, but effectively training people online. So even earlier in the education funnel, we're slowly but surely detaching ourselves from those physical campus and saying, do you really need to travel down to certain places? Like I started my career working at Google, and I remember being in a shuttle to San Francisco in Mountain View, and I had a great time. It's a brilliant company. Still, you had to commute an hour and a half to 2 hours on days where you had traffic jam because it was a long commute. So absolutely awesome company, talented people, but you get to spend anywhere between 2 to 3 hours a day in traffic. And that is not the way everyone wants to live today. So I feel like flexibility has been much welcome since.
Love it. This conversation has been wonderful. I want to make sure that our viewers, if they're interested in learning more, they're interested in finding remote roles, finding a remote community, and making this a part of their life, where can they go at Remotive to learn more?
Sure. So we are over at remotive.io. We have a job board where every single offer is hand curated by our team because we want to make sure we feature company who are putting trust front and foremost in the process. We also run a popular Slack community where we see it as a virtual co-working space where everyone can interact, network, find a job, get feedback, and just be a remote work that has connection. We feel like networking has been missing in the space so far. And we also run a popular newsletter and blog. So that's all over at remotive.io. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube as well. And if you have any question
Amazing.
for me, I'm on Twitter. Happy to connect anytime for sure at r2tell. I run office hours as well. So just send me a DM. Those are open. I'm always happy to chat about remote work.
Amazing. Very cool. And for the viewers out there, if you want to do one of these pick your brains as well, I'm going to put a link down below where you can submit questions and we can hop on a Zoom, and I'd love to do it. So thanks so very much. We hope the remote community grows even bigger. And if we can help in any way, let us know. Thanks for joining me, Rodolphe.